Welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli. That's Danny Cannell. That's Bud Elliott. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live at youtube.com/cover3 and all across the 24/7 Sports Facebook network. Thanks for hanging out. Smash the subscribe. Smash the like. Come and join us in the chat. Early Bird Award goes to Bud Elliott College Football. 8:57 a.m. getting the chat rocking and rolling. Love to see it, Bud. Glad you've been hanging out here for the last 2.5 hours, just waiting for everybody else to arrive, waiting for that red light to go. We appreciate it. First like too. Dedication. That's what we like to see, and you can be there too. Coach Week continues. The CBS Sports Coach rankings are up 1 through 69. Every single Power 5 coach has been ranked. Some of us turned in ballots, so we've got thoughts on our ballots, our opinions, how they stack up to the consensus rankings, and much, much more. Remember, CBSSports.com is going to be where you're going to find that full list. 69 through 26 posted yesterday. And if you're watching us live, we will have 1 through 25 should be posted imminently. But we begin with a massive bit of news from the recruiting world as the top quarterback in the 2024 cycle, 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola, commits to a school that just can't, man, about time Georgia Bulldogs have something go well for them on the field or on the recruiting trail. Georgia lands the commitment from the 6'3", 220-pound quarterback from Phoenix, Arizona. He is the son of a former NFL offensive lineman, Dominic Raiola, and he chose Georgia over USC and Nebraska, among others. He was previously a commit to Ohio State, decommits from the Buckeyes, and now he is headed to the Bulldogs. There are a lot of levels to this. There were some strong connections, where he could have maybe been able to be a big haul for Matt Rule. That USC, Lincoln Riley, always going to be a big selling point. But this is Georgia being able to go and get the best quarterback in the class. Danny, are the Dogs no longer just grounding and pounding? Do you see this as like the Georgia is doing that big level up thing where even offensively we start to see things sort of take off in the future?
Yes. And how scary is that?
I know.
Because, and it's kind of crazy because Kirby was brought to build Alabama East. And that's exactly what he's done, almost with a very exact same blueprint as Nick Saban did when he was at Alabama. Like, you win on defense in the trenches, right? You build from the inside out, but you build a defensive mindset where you can dominate, keep scores low. You play with adequate to, good quarterback play. Because Stetson Bennett played good this year. But it hasn't been a focal point of theirs to and the guys they've had at quarterback have been good, but not great. And now you get a potentially transcendent quarterback. This to me is just Kirby taking it to the next level, to the next stratosphere, which is kind of crazy considering they might win their third in a row this season. It's wild.
It's a big time get, man. Number 1 overall prospect in the country, number 1 rating. He's a really good player. Big time tools, already like college ready, physically pretty productive in high school. I think he has a real chance to hold on to the number 1 overall spot. We'll see him in Elite 11 in June. We'll see what he does in his senior season. But this is not as deep of a quarterback year as last year was. And for Georgia to miss on Arch Manning and to come back and say, you know what, hey, 2 titles in a row. Here you go. You watched us win the national title in person and just destroying TCU by 7 or 8 touchdowns. That's a huge get for them because I think the drop-off from Raiola to the next guy is probably bigger than the drop-off was from 1 to 2 last year with like a lot of guys that we had in Nico and Dante Moore and all those guys after Arch.
Here's my question. We all know he's highly rated, Dylan Raiola. It's not really a brand new day for Georgia, though. This is not the first time Kirby Smart has landed a top QB, highly rated 5-star player in the class. The last time this happened, Justin Fields showed up, and he was sitting on the bench behind whose name's completely
Jake Fromm.
Jake Fromm. Are we going to see the same thing? Is Raiola going to be sitting on the bench for a year behind somebody else, whether it's Beck or Vandegrift or something next season, and then end up at Ohio State? Or the big question to me is, will he be playing right away? Is he going to step on the field as a freshman and be given the reins of a team that could be coming off its third national title, was probably coming off at least a college football playoff appearance, or are they going to have him sit, learn, and grow?
I think he's probably a sit guy, honestly. And I think if you commit to Georgia, you know that going in. Not that they're going to tell you can't win the job, but I think the likelihood that you win the job of guys that Georgia clearly thought enough of to keep around behind Carson Beck this year, they're going to have a leg up on him as far as knowledge of the system. But you play in the SEC East, or, well, I guess there's no more SEC East after this year. Georgia plays in enough games where they have a whole bunch of blowouts, and they can probably get a whole lot of guys in. So I would expect him to get reps, but I don't think he's going to be a player who comes in to be an immediate starter. And that is probably more of a commentary on Georgia's quarterback room than it is on Dylan's skill set.
You mentioned, is there to your mind that if he is potentially going to be able to hold on to number one overall spot, is he the number one quarterback? And that's not even a question. There's very little that you could see happening this fall that would change that order.
There are guys that I think have tools who could potentially, if they just have a massive senior season and really blow up at Elite 11 when we get to see all these guys June 14th to 16th and compare them all. And there's some real value in that, right? Like standing and watching these guys go one after another, you start to pick up on differences, even amongst the elite players. But I think the combination of the performance and the bloodlines and the physical tools that he's already put on display make it pretty unlikely that somebody passes him, but it's certainly not impossible. Like we do care an awful lot in the ratings process about that senior year as well, because not everybody grows on the same timeline. Some guys just really show up late and end up being awesome.
So if Matthew Stafford gets the MVP Recruiter of the Year award for being able to lock this down for Georgia, who gets the dunce cap for messing this up?
I don't know that anybody completely messed it up, but I think that you could kind of get on Matt Rule a little bit about this offensive coordinator hire. So look, Raiola's uncle is the offensive line coach, right, for Nebraska. That's a pretty good feather in your cap for recruiting. He's the only person on Scott Frost's staff who was retained coach-wise. And then Matt Rule goes and hires Marcus Satterfield, who South Carolina fans basically threw a parade when they got rid of him. And I don't think that the Marcus Satterfield hire is a competitive hire if you are trying to sign top quarterbacks. I actually looked. He's had 14 seasons as a quarterback coach, offensive coordinator, or head coach. And I pulled the numbers from each of those stops with these quarterbacks. These are terrible. Like if I had a kid, my son, who was a top quarterback prospect, there's no way I would send my kid there. And I just personally, like, this is really, really bad. Look how bad Spencer Rattler was last year. And then, the final few games, whatever happened there, and we can all speculate as to, what was going on with the offense. I just don't think that's a competitive hire if you are trying to recruit top quarterbacks, which if you're in the Big Ten West, you don't actually need top quarterbacks to win, but we're not sure how long the Big Ten West is going to be around. Think about it. You're probably going to go to a non-divisional format in the Big Ten. And if your goal is to win the Big Ten, Michigan recruits good quarterbacks. Ohio State does too. Penn State does too. Wisconsin is trying. Iowa, not so much. But I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like, to me, that's a non-competitive hire. We mentioned this a couple of months ago when we did the show from Nashville. And I'm just like, I think this is kind of hiring your boy. And the guy's track record with quarterbacks is horrendous.
I'm going to push back on this a little bit.
All right.
Because I'm looking at Satterfield's history as an offensive coordinator, QB, head coach. And I'm looking at the quarterbacks he was working with and the schools he was doing it at. I mean, no disrespect to Greg Preston or Dexter Anoka or Joe Huseman. Like, what kind of numbers are we expecting from these guys in any offense? And you mentioned Spencer Rattler last year. 66% completion rate, 3,000 yards, 7.6 attempt, 18 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. The year before at Oklahoma with Lincoln Riley, Spencer Rattler averaged 7.9 yards per attempt with 11 touchdowns to 5 interceptions while completing, 60% of his passes. Like, it's Spencer Rattler. He was doing the same thing with Lincoln Riley that he was doing with Marcus Satterfield. So I don't know if I'm putting that on Satterfield. And on the other end, if we're going to say he didn't choose Nebraska because of Satterfield, like, we're going to pretend Mike Bobo is some sort of incredible draw for a top-rated quarterback given his history. And I'd say Mike Bobo's history is better.
A ton better.
Yeah, but it's not like he's Lincoln Riley. It's not like he's got like some air raid. He's produced 1,000 first-round picks. So I think the reason he went to Georgia is because Georgia's won 2 national titles, and Georgia's going to be competing for more national titles, and it's a very good place to play. And if you can get Stetson Bennett drafted, you're probably going to be a first-round pick if you're any good doing that at Georgia. Like I'm not going to say that Satterfield had no impact on this, but I think if just in a vacuum, if my choice is the 2-time reigning national champion or a Nebraska team that hasn't been to a bowl game in 5 years, even if my uncle is on that coaching staff, I'm probably choosing Georgia.
Sure. Now, if you're the dad of a top quarterback recruit, you're going to have big-time options. You're not going to pick Nebraska if this is who they hired at offensive coordinator, right? Like, this is a fumbling of the bag, I think. Nebraska. I'm not saying you would have picked him if we had a different offensive coordinator hired, but like, look how bad Rattler's numbers were before those final 2 games of the year, which I think a lot of people in South Carolina will tell you something happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think something else was going on as far as the play calling there the last 2 games. So, yeah, to me, you can't kneecap yourself if you're trying to compete with the big dogs to sign a top quarterback. This is just, to me, it's a fumbling of the bag. I'm not saying they would have got him, but there's no way I'd sign off on this. Would you guys, seriously? You'd be like, yeah, 14-year track record of this is bad.
I'm leaning more towards Tom of the total package. Like, if I was coming out, and I remember having these conversations with my dad coming out, being a highly sought after recruit, you kind of make a list of what you're looking for, right? And I think, and I guarantee, players have changed, the landscape has changed, but I was just jotting down a list of what I would look for if I was a high school quarterback coming out. And you tell me, in any of these categories, does Nebraska have the edge? The opportunity to win a title, Georgia cleared the head and shoulders above. Surrounding talent, which would probably go in the same category as winning a title, but it's not even close. Like, you want to be able to throw to elite level talent, to be blocked up front by elite level talent. Georgia's proven track record of that. NIL opportunity, which is something I added in there, and NFL opportunity. In all 4 of those categories, I would say you've got a significant edge for Georgia. So I think the bigger surprise would have been a shocking decision if he would have gone to Nebraska. The other thing too is, you guys have uncles? I had an uncle. Mm-hmm. He was kind of odd. Like, he'd give me a book every year for Christmas. Like he was like, my dad's my best friend, but even my dad would be like, "Oh, we got to go see your uncle today." I'm like, he was kind of awkward, totally different than my dad. We don't know how much that relationship comes into play. So even though there's blood there, it might not be the best idea to think that was going to seal the deal.
Dude, uncles are weird.
My uncles trying to get
podcast.
My Uncle Joe, who I adore, when I was in high school, first starting high school, he was trying to get me to move in with him because he was telling me he would get me into Northwestern or a Big Ten school. He would have me working out with him every day, studying, get to go play football. And I was just like, love you, Uncle Joe, but I think I'm just going to live with my family.
And when I'm in the uncle position, like, I'm odder. I can't even help it. I say things and I'm like, what was I even saying right there? You're just being I'm being a dad. I'm being normal. Now I'm being an uncle. I'm being weird. You can't help it. Uncles are weird. It happens sometimes.
I'm an uncle. Come on now.
I am too. Sometimes you just say odd stuff. It's just uncle talk. It's okay. All right, let's keep it going. We're going to get to the coach talk next. The CBS Sports coach rankings out this week. We're going to let you know some of our thoughts going into it and some reaction to the consensus next.
One weekend in May, only the best are welcome. An invitation reserved for legendary players and future stars, challenging each other at one of the most extraordinary courses in the nation. A major moment awaits. The PGA Championship on CBS.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast. The PGA Championship on CBS, second major of the season. Here for your PGA Championship locks. Who's got a winner?
John Rahm.
Yeah, Rombo.
Yeah.
Sick.
I'll go Rory. I'll say Rory. Just give you a different option.
No. Chip and I had this whole conversation yesterday.
We're out.
Still soul searching. He's looking for swing fixes.
We support him, but we're done picking him or betting him.
So Rory McIlroy, I think, is 4 years older than Justin Thomas, or maybe he has like 4 more years of experience. Rory McIlroy's like, if I never win again, I had a really successful career. And Justin Thomas is like, I kill myself every single time I don't win. It's just different world out there that between those two. But yes, make sure that you're watching CBSSports.com. CBS Sports for the weekend coverage should be a lot of fun. Okay, CBS Sports coach rankings. Let's go ahead and just begin at the very top. I will read out the top 10 for you, and then we'll start to work our way down the ballot. Talk about some guys that we are higher or lower than. Number 1, Nick Saban. Number 2, Kirby Smart. Number 3, Dabo Swinney. Number 4, Lincoln Riley. Number 5, Jim Harbaugh. Number 6, Brian Kelly. Number 7, Kyle Whittingham. Number 8, Ryan Day. Number 9, Luke Fickell. And number 10, James Franklin. Danny, off the top of your head, anything from that top 10 stand out to you?
I thought it is time you could make a case for Kirby Smart above Nick Saban at the moment, but I don't have a problem if Saban's one. It's not like you're going to pound the table and say he's overrated, but if you did currently where we sit right now, and even if you wanted to project towards after this season, I think you could say Kirby, but I mean, he's got a long way to go to chase, more titles before he catches him there, but just current landscape of where he is. But I thought the list was actually really accurate. I thought Kyle Whittingham getting some love as a top 10. It's like about damn time that he gets mentioned in these type of lists that are on there. I think the list is pretty spot on. I really do.
But did you have anything up in the top 10 that stood out to you?
Not really. I mean, I'm a little bit higher than the group is on Ryan Day. I guess I was a little bit lower on Lincoln Riley. I did have a pretty big drop on Dabo. I had him 7th.
Really?
Yeah, I just don't think he's using all of the rules to his advantage with Clemson's refusal to use the transfer portal. Like, it's his job to keep them as competitive as possible. And I think getting Garrett Riley in there is a nice feather in his cap, but there's no way in heck you can tell me that Clemson has no roster holes that they need to fill via the transfer portal. And they continually award scholarships to these kind of Dabo type stories, right? These small receivers who aren't going to help the roster. So I knocked him down. Like I need to see him embrace the transfer portal there at Clemson because everybody else around the sport is, and he's not doing his job completely if he's not trying to improve their roster to the maximum extent.
You know what? And like similar, like how I, said, man, if you're looking kind of projecting where it's headed, I think you're rightly knocking Dabo a little bit about where it's been and kind of where it's headed if he doesn't make those adjustments. I do think the Garrett Riley hire was huge, but you bring up some really good points about his unwillingness to truly embrace the transfer portal and, that sort of game.
The Luke Fickell. So Kyle Whittingham does not have a college football playoff appearance. He does have back-to-back Pac-12, two-time Pac-12 championships, and clearly the work he has done there is factoring in there. Luke Fickell does have a college football playoff appearance, but only a couple of conference titles, and those are in the American Athletic Conference. Within the top 10, Luke Fickell, to me, James Franklin at 10, does have one Big Ten title and then a couple of New Year's Six Bowl appearances, no playoff appearances. But Luke Fickell seemed to me as one of the highest rated, like, I don't know, man, he's just a good coach kind of guy, where you had to reach for intangibles. Because when I'm filling out my ballot, a lot of it was trophies. I don't have Dabo knocked because of what he's doing with the transfer portal. Because you know what he has? 6 straight ACC championship rings, 6 college football playoff appearances, 2 national championships, and a couple of national title game appearances in there as well. Like, that's sort of a trophy case thing that allows me to stack it. Jim Harbaugh is rising in my rankings because he's got 2 Big Ten titles and 2 college football playoff appearances. So, like, that is something that's going to boost him along the way. But there's intangibles to it too. And Fickell was one where I will pull up mine right now. Luke Fickell, I had him at 10. He finished at 9. And that was one of the highest ones where I was like, I don't know, man. He's a really, really good coach. Everything that I hear about him, everything that I read about him, Cincinnati had not won at the level that it had won until he got there consistently. Brian Kelly flashed. It had a couple years where they would flash a little bit, but what he was able to do with the Bearcats program was very impressive. So while Fickell doesn't necessarily have the trophies that some of the other guys in the top 10 do, I think I do feel comfortable being able to fight for him as a top 10 coach.
Yeah, we've been doing these rankings since 2016. Luke Fickell is the first coach to debut in the top 10. And, because he'd been in the group of 5, so he was not included in these rankings. But I had him at 9, so he's exactly where I had him ranked on my ballot. And I think it makes a lot of sense because when you look at these top 10 coaches, most of them have playoff appearances. Kyle Whittingham doesn't, but the rest of them all do, except for James Franklin and Whittingham. So you give Fickell that kind of credit because even if he hasn't coached at the Power 5 level yet, he got Cincinnati to the college football playoff. He produced a bunch of NFL draft picks. Clearly, he has the blueprint to build a winning program, and he knows how to implement it. And now he's going to be getting a chance to implement it at Wisconsin. So for me, when I was doing my rankings, you have to kind of give him that benefit of the doubt, where some of the guys, even if they have more experience at this level below him, like you can argue about Sonny Dykes being, 11th or Chris Kleeman, after just winning the Big 12. But I have more confidence right now in Luke Fickell being able to kind of maintain his status as a top 10 coach than I do those two guys going forward. I think that's kind of what settled it for me.
I had him the 11th, which is not really far off from you guys. I thought there was a fairly clear top 8. And to me, to be in that very top range, you have to show the ability to recruit at an elite level. That's the most important skill if you're chasing national titles, right? I mean, Mark D'Antoni doesn't have a title. Gary Patterson never won a title. Gene Chizik did, because you get the players. So I had a cutoff at 8, and then I had a group of 6 that I thought were elite at what they do, but they're not actually chasing national titles at the schools that they're at. Whittingham, Dykes, Fickell, Kleiman, DeBoer, sort of in that range. They've maxed it out. They're super consistent. But if Fickell shows that he can elevate Wisconsin's recruiting to where they're actually a real threat to, do a TCU type thing, then I think I would have him in the top 10.
Speaking of, Sonny Dykes, TCU checks in at number 11 on the consensus. That is up 24 spots from where he was at this time last year. And that's what a run all the way to the national title game will get you. And as Tom mentioned, Chris Kleiman at 12, Chip Kelly at 13. That is up 15 spots from where he was. Lane Kiffin at 14, Dave Clawson at 15, Josh Heupel at 16. That is up 17 spots. Mike Gundy at 17, down 7. Mark Stoops at number 18. That's up close to where he was. And Mike Norvell up 28 spots into the top 20 at number 19. I want to come back to Norvell. Jimbo down 15 spots from number 5 to number 20. Yikes. Brett Bielema is up 17 spots. He's at 21. Mac Brown at 22. Lance Leipold at 23. And that's a 19-spot move. PJ Fleck. I just saw a photo of PJ Fleck as a student teacher today, and it just made me so happy.
Shout out Sickos Committee.
Yeah, shout out to the Sickos Committee. That's a photo that my day is better because of that. You guys rock. Just frosted tips, a nice matte shirt with the sleeves rolled up.
He's looking like PJ Fleck. It's exactly what you think.
That guy would definitely let us be able to get out of history class 10 minutes early to go to get a little bit more off-campus lunch. Dave Doran, 25. Last year was 25. Dave Doran, the honorary 25th spot. Tom, you assembled this list for CBSSports.com, all the different votes. You've got the consensus. You write some blurbs. In terms of movement, was Mike Norvell one of the most dramatic sort of risers that you saw up at least near the top of the rankings?
Yeah, he was the biggest riser.
Okay.
Of all the coaches in the rankings, he climbed further than anybody. The biggest dropper was Pat Fitzgerald. We'll get to that. But I just, one thing I wanted to mention here, because I think it's a trend within this that's kind of the sport as a whole, because Sonny Dykes was at 11, Chris Kleiman was at 12. If you look at the top 10 coaches on this list, 7 of them are in the SEC and Big Ten. One of the non-Big Ten SEC coaches is Lincoln Riley, who will be in the Big Ten last year. The only ACC coach is Dabo, the guy who's won the national title. The only other Pac-12 coach is Kyle Whittingham, who has won 2 conference titles. No Big 12 coaches in the top 10. So even our rankings are kind of starting to reflect the actual, reality of the sport right now, in which it's 2 super leagues and everybody else. But I would say Mike Norvell was somebody who, like I said, he was the biggest climber, but he's actually somebody I'm much lower on than everybody else. So I'm interested to see, because I had Mike Norvell at 33rd. He finished at 19th. So if I've got him there, he had to have had some really high votes. I'm guessing he was in the top 10 for quite a few people. And I get it because Florida State just had a really good year and there's a lot of hype going into this next season. But I'm kind of a little more stoic when it comes to these things. I want to see 2 years before I really kind of give you a huge bump. Like, obviously I gave Sonny Dykes a bump because he got to the title game. But I think Norvell climbed a little too high based off one season. I need to see him do it 2 years in a row.
I mean, I had him 16th, right? Like if he hits the win total that's posted for them this year, which is 10, then I think I'll bump him up higher, assuming that their high school recruiting, which is where national title teams are generally built, follows suit, and that he's recruiting at that top 8, top 10 level, which if you're a really good coach and you have an elite job in Florida and you are winning, you should do, right? Like the portal's a great Band-Aid, but if you look at the draft, top 3 rounds, not a lot of portal guys there, right? So if he follows through, hits the win total, their high school recruiting improves, then I'll have him in the top 10. Right now, I think 16 is pretty fair. Like the guy did go to a BCS game at Memphis, right? So like he improved on what Justin Fuente had, and he has executed his rebuild plan. Very rocky at the start, but obviously last year, a pretty nice turnaround year. I mean, 16 is still a pretty big jump.
Mm-hmm.
I thought 16 was probably because how far do you want to go? I wouldn't put him in front of Heupel. I wouldn't put him in front of Clausen, who just beat him this past season. But I probably would have been okay putting him ahead of Gundy and Stoops, who, mentioning what is happening in the college football landscape, was just handed $9 million a year for, elevating to Kentucky to a better place. But it's not like they're perennially competing for SEC East titles. So I would say a couple spots. I do think it's going to be a very telling season for Florida State. And if you do dig in deeper towards last year, I understand why people start pointing to how real was it. Like you lost to the 3 good teams you played, and you played very much down to the competition, especially the last couple games. Florida had them on the ropes, a average to below average team from the SEC, and Oklahoma took them to the ropes and a below to, average year by their standards. So I get it. I'm a believer in Mike Norvell long-term. So like if I was I get it. Like, and I was shaking my head saying, how can you not have him in the top 10 or wherever? But I think 16 is probably about a sweet spot where I would maybe move him a couple more, but I think it's a fair ranking where he is.
I've got a middle group between 24 and 33 that are names, guys, guys that have been around, like the solid middle of the road burger and fries. It's going to be fantastic. It'll get you going. And then some coaches on the rise, I put just above them. Some coaches on the rise, I put just below them. And so to me, I had Mike Norvell at 22, AKA just above that crew. Like, pay respects to what Gus Malzahn at his best was able to do. But right now, I'll get a little Mike Norvell. I'll take a little stock on the rise. For the record, I mentioned Malzahn. I had Malzahn at 27. Again, Norvell at 22 right there. Tom, what else stood out in terms of the big move? You want to talk about the biggest drop?
Yeah, Pat Fitzgerald dropped, I think, what was it, 30 or 33 spots, was it? I don't have it off the top of my head. It was a big drop. This is a guy who we had in the top 10 2 years ago. After Northwestern, during the COVID season, won the Big Ten West, got to the conference championship game. Then they won 3 games the next year. He dropped about 14 spots. They win 1 game. He drops about 30 some odd spots. And I think there's a little too much recency bias in this, because when I do my rankings, I'm taking the entire career into, consideration for where I'm ranking them. So I can't forget the fact that Fitz took over Northwestern and he's won like 10 games in a season at Northwestern 3 times. He's had a bunch of 9-win seasons. He's won 2 division titles, and he's done all this at a program where it is much more difficult to do that than at most other programs. Like Dave Clawson, we give a ton of credit to for what he's doing at Wake. Dave Clawson doesn't have as many accolades as Pat Fitzgerald had at Northwestern. So I understand the recency bias of the last 4 years not being good, but I just look at the entire situation and think that that's too low. I'm not saying he should be top 10. I'm not even saying he should be top 20. I had him at 31. For him to be at 45 just seems like way too steep of a drop.
I had him 53rd.
Woo!
You take out the COVID year, the guy has 3 conference wins in the last 3 full seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's hard for me to separate what is Northwestern with their academic requirements and their inability to get players in via the transfer portal. Like they're not quite Stanford, but it's certainly not easy to get players in to be Wildcats through the portal. And I think you are seeing just a general drop of coaches at these private schools where it's very hard to get transfers in as transfers become a more important part of the sport. But like when he lost Mike Hankwitz, he basically lost everything because they never really played good offense in Evanston. And I mean, just what is there to like unless you like in recent years? And I do my rankings based on who would I hire right now, right? Like that's why I like Kirby, number one. I don't really know what the track record long-term is really good. Take the last 3 full seasons. It's terrible. Like they're Colorado bad the last 3 full years.
I worry for the same reason I was worried about David Shaw at the end of the Stanford era. Like and I'm a huge Pat Fitzgerald fan. I just wonder if he is trying to coach with his arms tied behind his back, with their unwillingness to embrace the direction that college football is headed with the academic requirements that you talked about. I really worry about just how hard that job is. And even from I think it burned out David Shaw, and you just saw it. It was evident everywhere. Now it's a little bit different because he played there. He's a fit, but I mean, losing gets old, and if you feel like, oh man, I can't do it. So that's where I would push back though, Bud, because I still think somebody would, and I wouldn't hesitate to hire him at a school that would open up the resources.
See, that's why it's a tough ranking for me. Yeah. Like the results recently are horrible, but I do think he has some serious limitations from the school. And I'm not sure anybody can win in Evanston right now if you have to play with these rules.
Yeah, I don't think he's forgotten how to coach. I think he's just in a really difficult situation, and he hasn't hit on a quarterback, which has been a problem. Like when Clayton Thorson had it for 4 years, I made fun of Clayton Thorson a lot because Barton was a big Clayton Thorson fan. But since Thorson left, they just have not hit on a QB, and it has really impacted them overall. But I think if you put Pat Fitzgerald at just like a public school that had looser academic restrictions and allowed him to bring different guys, I think Pat Fitzgerald would win a lot of games there.
And I'm sorry to be cheeseball here, but culture guy. Like that dude had Northwestern teams playing way over their head. I've got him at 32. Again, he checked in at 45. It is one of the biggest differences that we have. I pay respect to the entire track record, and it is that iconic thing where even though Frank Beamer near the end of his run with Virginia Tech was going like 6-6, 7-5, 6-6, you still were like, yeah, but he is Virginia Tech football. Pat Fitzgerald is Northwestern football. The impact that he has had on that program has been tremendous. And I give a little bit of credit there. I am not, if I'm an AD, who am I hiring? I think I am, given awards for sort of accomplishments as well, not forward thinking, but also looking back and giving some bonus points to that. Speaking of where are we different, coming up on the other side, the coaches who we are higher than the consensus and lower than the consensus. We'll run through a couple of those next.
It's finally here.
Took you long enough?
The moment you've been waiting for.
Can we get on with this, please?
The movie critics and audiences love is now streaming on Paramount Plus.
You can't deny the people what they crave.
Oh, we got him now!
It's fairly wonderful. Oh, I got a good feeling about this.
Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, rated PG-13, now streaming on Paramount Plus.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, continuing to break down some of the big takeaways from the CBS Sports Coach Rankings. We had some of the ballots that were submitted for these consensus rankings, and so we've got opinions on why some of these guys might have checked in at numbers other than where we had them. Bud, where do you want to take the spotlight? Let's go positive. Who is somebody that you are higher on than the consensus?
Yeah, so I'm much higher than the consensus on Mario Cristobal. I had him at, where do I have Cristobal here? I had, so the consensus had Cristobal at 39th, which I'm guessing is a huge drop. And I had him, where did I have Cristobal? I should probably.
He was down 20 spots.
I had him 19th.
That was where he was last season.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this on maybe last week's show as far as regrading the year one coaches. My opinion on Cristobal really has not changed. How did he win in Oregon? He recruited his butt off, right? Especially along the premium positions along the lines of scrimmage. Okay? It wasn't like the great in-game coaching. It wasn't masterful coordinator hires. He gets to Miami. What do? They sign elite offensive and defensive line classes. He's kind of following the playbook. Now, his coordinator hire on offense ended up not working well, obviously. They missed a bowl game. That was disappointing. So I had him a little bit down from where I had him last year, but the way the guy wins is the way the guy wins. And he still seems to be executing that plan in Miami. Now, if the recruiting slips even a little bit, I'll drop him like a rock because I don't think the actual coaching element there is great. But he's at one of those jobs that at least thinks he can play for a national title. He's a really good recruiter. If you're at one of those jobs, recruiting is the most important part to me. And the guy's a pretty proven winner.
I'm like Bud. My opinion of Mario Cristobal did not change at all based off of that 1 year at Miami. But I've never had Mario Cristobal ranked highly to begin with. I had him at 45th. Or no, I'm sorry, that's wrong. I had him at 49th. I understand he's accomplished, like he won conference titles at Oregon, but he also did so in years when USC wasn't really competitive. And I felt like Mario left Oregon last year to go to Miami, and Oregon didn't drop off. Miami got worse than it had been under Mandy Diaz. He lost to Middle Tennessee. His teams were getting blown out by inferior teams or teams that are supposed to be inferior. And I get he's a great recruiter, but man, once you get the talent, you have to do something with it. And I just feel like he cuts off his nose to spite his face so many times with some of the decisions he makes. And like, I'm not trying to take away from anything he's accomplished because he's accomplished quite a bit. And if you're just ranking off that, I should probably have him a lot higher on my board. But when it comes to the part of these rankings where it's like, who would I hire? There are so many coaches I would rather have than Mario Cristobal.
He's
so
mid.
many guys. Yeah.
He is mid. And like,
It kind of depends on the program you run too, right?
I've got him 36 because I think he's mid. I think the total package is fine. I think and look, that's the other funny thing about these rankings. Congratulations. You're a Power 5 head coach. You're clearly.
Yeah, you're pretty good.
You're pretty good at something if you have one of these jobs as a Power 5 head coach. But among Power 5 head coaches, for right now, it's replacement level because recruiting is good. But what about also getting your guys ready for game day in the right headspace, being able to go out there and compete? And you can blame the roster that you inherited. And he was talking about how basically begging parents to come and pick up their kids after losses. Like I think he's fine. He's just fine. And that's why I had him in that middle hunk of coaches. And on my final ballot, he ended up at 36.
I think that's probably right. You guys are probably accurate. And I like Mario a lot. I think you got to see it. And I think it was a good sign that he ripped the Band-Aid off with the mistakes he made at coordinators. I wasn't thrilled last year when it was taking a while and they weren't getting their first choices. But doesn't that dock him that the coordinators, especially offensive coordinators, aren't lined up and begging to go coach at a talent-rich state that has resources that will pay, that, you have a brand that's tradition-rich and you can't have just your pick of the litter, which they didn't. And we've seen that happen not once but twice, that a lot of coordinators that they wanted wouldn't take that job. I think that's maybe the worst indictment.
Oh, I don't think he's an easy guy to work for.
Oh, and that would be why people don't sign up. Well, then,
yeah, I think so.
But isn't that part of it, though?
No,
No doubt.
Part of it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I know. I think if he could hire better coordinators, then maybe.
But you're just blinded by those recruiting stars. Come on now. Come on.
At certain jobs, that's the most important thing I value. To me, there's 18 jobs where recruiting is the most important part of it. Right? Either you can get the studs or you can't. Like I would not take Mario Cristobal at Kansas or Kansas State or Texas Tech or Cal or 51 of the 69 jobs on this list. But there's 18 jobs where I think he would do an awesome job.
So,
and he's at one.
CFB Payne in the chat. Mario is the perfect Ron Zook to lead to an Urban Meyer era at Miami.
He's kind of already doing that at Oregon, possibly with Dan Lanning's team.
Yeah.
Ooh. All right, Tom. Let's say higher or lower. Let's go ahead and give a spotlight to somebody we haven't gotten a chance to talk about yet.
I'm higher on Pat Narduzzi. Actually, I'm going to go with two coaches here, if that's okay. Do I have permission? Because it will segue into somebody on your list, Chip.
Okay.
I'm going to go with Kirk Ferentz and Pat Narduzzi. Pat Narduzzi won 10 games, got to the Peach Bowl 2 seasons ago, had a Heisman finalist QB, loses that Heisman finalist QB, and Pitt still wins 8 games the next year. Pitt is not really a program in which you can lose somebody of that caliber and then just you expect to keep on trucking. But they did for the most part. He gets punished in the rankings. Kirk Ferentz wins 8 games, which is what he's been doing at Iowa for like a billion years. Nothing changes. It's the same stuff every year. He was always highly ranked in these rankings. He drops a bunch of spots. Don't really understand why. You can say, well, he's not changing. Well, that's not true because Iowa's been very active in the transfer portal this offseason, doing the stuff that people were criticizing him for not doing. And while we haven't seen the new offense based on the players they're bringing in, I'm assuming the offense is going to look a little different. So I don't understand the rankings there, especially when you compare it to somebody who won 10 games 2 years ago, won 8 games last year, and then climbed 4 spots in the rankings for winning fewer games. I don't know what he accomplished for that. Lane Kiffin. So why is Lane Kiffin climbing in these rankings while guys like Ferentz and Narduzzi, who are actually doing well, dropping? I don't understand it.
Okay, I can make some sense of this, I guess. I'm not crazy high or low on any of these guys. I'm like 7 spots lower than consensus on Kiffin. I'm 3 spots higher than consensus on Narduzzi. And I'm just 5 spots lower than consensus on Kirk Ferentz. Look, both for Kirk and Pat probably hate offense, but at least one is not using the program to funnel money to his son, right? Like there's kind of a nepotism,
nepotism power rankings,
money
Kirk
laundering
Ferentz,
scam type
1, 2,
difference
3, and
there.
4.
So like to me, that was worth about 9 spots. And Narduzzi has gone to a BCS game or a New Year's Six game more recently than Kirk has, and he has at a lesser resourced program. So I guess that's why I explained some of that. Kiffin, I think part of the consistency that he's shown so far in the SEC is worth something. Ole Miss is typically a job that's just all over the board, and he's won a good number of games in a really tough division. I have them all pretty closely clustered together.
Can we be honest?
Yeah. Please.
Some people are ranking Lane a lot higher on their list because he's easy to get a hold of.
I am so close to the consensus on so many of these coaches. Kirk Ferentz at 30 on the list. I've got him at 30 on my ballot. Pat Narduzzi at 29 on the list. I've got Pat Narduzzi at 25 on my ballot. But Lane Kiffin, who is checking in on this list way up at number 14, well, Lane Kiffin showed up at number 28 on my ballot because he's fine. He's fine. He is fine. He is doing exactly what Ole Miss needs to do. Like, he is fine. Like, where are the trophies? And
he was top 15 in our consensus rankings.
Yeah, he was 14.
Number 14.
Oh my God! I had him at 21. We need to have a little investigation here. Tom, you had him what, 20s?
I had him. Let's see. I had Lane Kiffin I had him at 27.
I had him at 28. He's fine.
Like we know the SEC is leaving CBS next year, right? Like we don't need to do this, company voters. Like who is putting him top 10?
People just like him.
Somebody's got to have him top 10 in order to balance this out.
Those 2 Conference USA titles really carry a lot of weight with some of our voters, man. I don't know what's
fun.
How many voters?
Right? He's likable.
Voters do we have?
We've got a lot. It used to be when we first started, there were like 7 of us. Now I'm guessing there's around 20 something.
Do you know how many end of season AP top 25 finishes Lane Kiffin has as a head coach?
1?
2.
2. Okay.
He was ineligible in 2010. 2011, they finished number 6 in the final AP poll. In 2021 at Ole Miss, they finished 11th in the final AP poll. No top 25 finishes at FAU. No other top 25 finishes at USC. He got fired on the tarmac. He went 7-6 at Tennessee. He is 23-13 with a barely above 500 record, 14-11 in 3 years at Ole Miss. He's fine. Ole Miss doesn't need to be competing for championships, but putting him up in the top 10 says that you are expecting him to go and compete for championships. He is fun, but he's fine. Who had him at 5? Can we guess? Can we speculate recklessly about what voter had him in the top 7?
Barrett versus the field.
I would say that's a good guess. I would also, I mean, I don't know. Did our Ole Miss 24/7 writer have a vote in this panel? Because he might.
Okay, let me bring up one that I did not feel bad about, but the one that I am the most uneasy about based on where I had them on the ballot, especially, where they stood. Because again, I'm pretty close to consensus with a lot of these. But Dan Lanning is number 36 in the consensus. That is up 18 spots from where he was. I had Dan Lanning at number 52. Dan Lanning has done a lot of good work on the recruiting trail. He has one single year as a head coach. Now, I maybe should have given more respect to Dan Lanning for what he was able to do as Georgia's defensive coordinator, for the fact that he was able to come in and immediately have Oregon, up there in the mix. But they finished their season in the Holiday Bowl, not in the Pac-12 championship game. And as we look ahead to this season, I think Oregon is one of the teams in the mix for the Pac-12 title. But I'm not picking Oregon to be winning the Pac-12 title. I think that I am probably a little low on Dan Lanning. So I'm out here just being honest about this. I looked at the final rankings. I said, you know what? I probably should have had him a little bit higher. But I still am sitting here with Jonathan Smith ahead of him, his rival in state. Jonathan Smith has a longer track record. I am sitting here with Kalen DeBoer ahead of him, his rival up there in the Pacific Northwest. So I might be a little bit low here, but the small sample size is my argument. And I would say of all the coaches that I've got outside of the top 39, this is the one with the most room to make a massive jump heading into next season. I just got to see a little bit more.
Yeah, I had him at 50. I'm with you. Like I said earlier, I'm a little more pragmatic with these rankings, where I don't just make huge jumps with guys based off one season. But I agree with you. I think that he has somebody. If Oregon has another year after losing Dillingham, if they have the same kind of year and they're competing for a Pac-12 title, he's going to jump into the 30s at a minimum.
I had him at 30, which is pretty close to consensus, but higher than you two. My thought is look, I thought he did a really good job as defensive coordinator at Georgia, but a lot of that's Kirby. I know that he did a great job recruiting at Georgia. He got quality coaches to come work for him on both sides of the ball. Then he lost some of those guys, and he made impressive replacements, right? Getting UTSA's Will Stein, which tells me that the word around the industry is that, hey, this is a guy you want to work for. And he's clearly clicking with recruits. Oregon's a job that thinks it can win a national title. It's played for a couple of them. You have to be able to recruit at a certain level there. I give you a lot of credit if you get in one of those jobs and you have a good first year and you recruit to that level. So I had him. I mean, I didn't think 30 was crazy. Some people are, I guess, more bought in than I am. I'm also a lot higher on DeBoer.
You're higher than consensus at 30.
Yes, yeah.
Lanning,
Yeah.
I think he's probably accurate in this list. I'm higher on DeBoer too with you, Bud. I want to see coaches that do more with less. And it's not like he didn't inherit a great situation with what transpired right before he left. There was a lot of toxicity around the program. I go back to even dealing with him at Indiana when I covered a lot of their games that year, and when he had Penix the first time around. We've seen that reunion. And now that they're again projected to be one of the top teams of the Pac-12, I think I'm with you on that one. I have one you guys are way down on, and I totally understand why, but I think it could be a massive jump, especially if you consider where their win total is. But since we're including times as coordinators, Brent Venables, 52. I'm sure you guys probably cast him aside as well. But they had a top 5 recruiting class this past season. They're doing well in the transfer portal. Their win total is 9.5. I think he'll be able to turn around some people, and he better do it this year to capture some momentum before they go to the SEC, or else they're in big trouble. But I think you could see a big turnaround. I think there was a massive culture shift as far as Lincoln Riley's mentality, a little more laid back, and Brent Venables coming in, I think was a little bit of a shock to the system. I think they're going to be much better this season. So I think he's got a chance for a much bigger jump. I probably would have been slightly higher and probably in the low, probably about 10 spots higher.
I had Venables at 47, one spot behind Clark Lee, who, if you remember, went over by October. So That
Yeah,
had to be worth something.
And it's so funny because I've got Venables in this spot where we're dealing with small sample size. They fell short of the win total and short of expectations last season. We've unpacked that a lot, especially looking ahead to this season. But he's ahead of coaches that are dropping for me. He's ahead of Sam Pittman. He's ahead of Scott Satterfield. He's ahead of Neil Brown, Justin Wilcox, guys with longer track records where I don't love the trajectory. So I think, was he 52? I had him at 51. I am right there with the consensus. But Danny, I love the take there. If you're looking for coaches down near the bottom that could be just ready for a rocket ship back up, then Brent Venables could be one. Can I throw one more at y'all?
No.
Because we need to investigate this one.
You're grounded.
Mel Tucker checks in at number 24 after leading Michigan State to a Peach Bowl in the 2021 season. And he tumbles down to number 47, down 23 spots after going 5-7 last year. I've got Mel Tucker at 35. It is one of my bigger differences. In 12 spots higher is one of the biggest differences in terms of a coach I am higher on than consensus. That feels like an overreaction to me. Where am I at with Mel Tucker? And for the same thing, it's like Mel Tucker is in that Jonathan Smith, Joey McGuire, Shane Beamer, Marcus Freeman. Like, that's the company that I've got for Mel Tucker right now. He's got recruiting success. He can work the transfer portal. He's got one really, really good year.
He also just lost his
Lost his
quarterback
QB and his
best
receiver.
Yeah, FSU, and that receiver's deciding today, right? I think FSU's got a pretty good shot there.
Yeah.
So you're saying that he should be a little bit closer to Dana Holgorsen and Mike Loxley.
Yeah, I had him at 43rd.
I think Loxley is much more proven than he is, and has shown a trajectory after being a really bad coach early in his career. I do have him higher than Holgorsen.
Yeah, I think Loxley's a good call because Loxley is a coach that I think is, compared to my ballot, was a little too low on these rankings because
I had him top 40.
Yeah, I had him at 39. And Loxley, every single year he's been at Maryland, they have improved their win total. And the recruiting has gotten better. And yeah, they've had a lot of misses on guys they've taken chances on. But overall, that program's getting better. Michigan State's just up and down. Like, they had the one really good season so far, but there hasn't really been any sustained success under Tuck. So if Michigan State goes like 8-4, 9-3 this year, I won't be shocked. Okay, I'll be a little shocked, but it wouldn't be completely out of line, I don't think. But I don't think the drop, I thought he was too high last year. So I don't think the drop, I think the drop this year is more of a course correction than it is an overreaction.
All right. That's fair. Might still be a little too high on Tuck. That's okay. You got to get out here and you got to figure out, what went wrong. It's ranking 69 of them. It's tough to do. Nice. Bud, where would you like, what other coaches are interesting to you? Time we got left.
All right. Because I do have to jump to another summer school episode, which starts next week, guys. We already talked DeBoer. I had DeBoer top 15. I think if you look at his track record at multiple levels and like always having an elite offense, always having elite quarterback play, regardless of who the kid is, I think that's a super valuable skill set to have in a head coach. Can we talk about the guy rated dead last?
Troy
Taylor? Like we don't think this guy's accomplishments at Sac State are any good? Like back-to-back titles in that league, making it to the quarterfinals in the FCS. Like, we really think that like he's the worst coach in the country.
That's more of an indictment on the program, don't you think? Like projecting what it's going to be. Yeah.
And like maybe like our voters need to do more research on this. Come on. Like, this guy has been a head coach for a long time and wins quite a bit.
I can't speak to the rest of the voters. My process is, if you are a first-year head coach overall, or in the case of Troy Taylor, you've never coached at the FBS level, I just start you at the bottom. I had him at 64th. I had him ahead of the other first-year coaches who have never coached a game. But like him and Dion, I both have at the bottom, where it's along with like Ryan Walters and Zach Arnett and those kind of guys who haven't been there yet. So that's just, for me, it's an easier way, so that way I don't have to say somebody sucks.
I had him 50th, which maybe I'm the highest guy, but like, if you look at some of these guys like Lance Leipold, Kleiman, all these type dudes, if you win a lot at that level repeatedly over a good number of years, unless you go to a job where recruiting is like a really big part of it, you generally translate pretty well. because you just know how to run the small parts of a program. Now, Stanford's a unique job. So, but like we have Zach Arnett rated over him. That's like a career defensive coordinator, never been a head coach, super young guy.
Oh, hold on. I got yelled
Doesn't
at
he
by
have
a
a bowl
Mississippi
win?
State fan the other day because of Zach Arnett's
Brent
ranking.
Pry. Like, I mean, terrible first year career defensive coordinator. Like, I would take Troy Taylor over. I mean, obviously over about 20 guys on this list.
Woo!
I see what you're saying, but I can totally understand why somebody would start him at the bottom. But I totally get what you're saying. I think you make a lot of sense.
I'm super high on Jeff Brom compared to the list. I'm like almost 20 spots higher. Purdue, yeah, I have him. Where's he on the list?
I've got him at 17.
Okay, so
Wow.
Chip's there. Yeah,
Western Kentucky too.
Chip, I have him 15.
Purdue.
I had him 24.
Purdue's not a job you can win at typically. Like Joe Tiller did it. He also had a Hall of Fame NFL quarterback for 4 of those years, so that's helpful. Denny Hope, generally terrible. Darrell Hazel didn't make a bowl in any of his 4 or 5 seasons. Brom had 4 of his 6 years. He was top 3 or better in that division at probably the worst resourced program in that division. Like that's consistently elevating that program. I think there's a lot of signal to that. So I'm really high on Jeff Brom.
Yeah, Jeff Brom is at number 33 on the list, very close to where he was last year before leading Purdue into the Big Ten championship game. And that season, I did move Brom up in mine. Again, I had him at 17, so I had him 16 spots higher. One of the biggest differences. It's Jeff Brom's good, man. It's a good coach.
Been on that since Western Kentucky.
Yes, I'm saying he's even got the track record as a head coach. Tom, anybody else before we get out of here that you wanna spotlight?
It's not really. I was much lower on Kalani Sitake than our overall. Not that I don't like Sitake. It's again, I had him at 55. He finished at 41 because again, BYU's played a lot of Power 5 opponents. He's had a lot of success there, but I was just kind of taking a wait and see approach. I want to see how BYU does in the Big 12 before I just anoint him better than some guys who I feel like have already proven it at this level. 41
feels high. I had him. I had Sitake at 50, and very much in that group of like a 45 to 59. Kind of. I bumped you up, but there was a little bit of a ceiling on what I was expecting. Reminder to this list: CBS Sports Coach Rankings. You can find it at CBSSports.com. It is the consensus of ballots from us and many others across the CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports Network. So go and check that out. And you can follow him on Twitter at BudElliott3. You can follow him at Tom Fernelli. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Your favorite coach sucks.